Welcome to the debate. So imagine you finally decide to change your life. You start going to therapy, you start journaling every morning, you set firm boundaries with the people around you.
And almost immediately, you just feel incredibly worse.
Right, exactly. You're losing your temper, you're exhausted, and you find yourself constantly taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. I mean, mathematically, you are literally losing ground. But what if the neuroscience of human behavior says you are actually winning?
It is the ultimate catch-22 of self-improvement.
It really is. Today, we're digging into the progress paradox, a guide to internal transformation, and we'll be drawing specifically on the text and episode 8 of the Becoming series. This material looks closely at that exact phenomenon, why actively working on personal growth so often triggers our oldest, most destructive patterns.
And it frames a really fascinating central question for us today. When you're putting in the work, but your reality is 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, is that friction a necessary positive sign? Like that you're internally reorganizing? Or are we just using the concept of a paradox as a highly comforting rationalization for the fact that we're actually just stuck?
I lean heavily toward the former here. My position is that the premise is sound. Real transformation is fundamentally destructive before it ever becomes constructive. You are quite literally dismantling an old operating system. And when you do that, you need a strategic, almost militant inward focus just to survive the sheer friction of that change.
As progress, right? And we start viewing the external world and all its demands purely as noise or an attack on our peace, we risk building an echo chamber. It becomes this very pristine, theoretical kind of growth that actively avoids the real-world tests that actually make transformation stick.
Okay, let's start with what it actually feels like to tear down that old operating system, because the source material is incredibly vivid about this. It contrasts these frustrated, chaotic, messy red patterns in our minds with this smooth teal-green growth.
Right, the color metaphor.
Yeah, and it makes the point that growth isn't just taking a brand new healthy habit and gently placing it on top of your broken foundation. You have to completely rip the foundation up. Think of it like muscle memory in a golf swing.
Okay, I'm with you so far.
If you have a terrible slice and a coach comes in and completely changes your grip, your swing is going to feel incredibly awkward. For a few weeks, you aren't just going to feel like a worse golfer, you are literally going to be a worse golfer.
Hitting the ball straight into the woods.
Exactly. But the mechanism of change requires you to temporarily break the automatic neurological pathway to build a better one. The text explicitly calls this a battle with a shadow version of yourself. Feeling further behind than when you started isn't a failure. It's the literal, biological proof that you are disrupting the old code. I mean, the old system is fighting back.
Look, I understand the mechanics of breaking a habit. The golf analogy makes sense because, well, a golf swing is a controlled environment. But human behavior isn't. My issue is with the specific math the text relies on.
The 2 steps forward, 3 steps back?
And 3 steps back, you are at a net negative of 1. You are losing ground. And my concern is that validating a net negative as being on exactly the right path completely strips the individual of accountability.
I don't think it strips accountability at all.
Well, think about it. If you're listening to this right now and thinking, wait, I skipped the gym for a month, I yelled at my partner yesterday, and I maxed out my credit card, does that mean I'm deeply engaged in the chaotic friction of personal growth? The answer has to be no.
Okay, that's an extreme.
But if an old trigger wins and your immediate framework tells you, congratulations, this means you are in the deepest part of becoming, where is the incentive to figure out why the trigger won in the first place?
Because the incentive is baked into the pain of the meltdown itself. No one actually enjoys taking those 3 steps back. The text isn't saying, throw a parade for your meltdown and change nothing. It's saying, trust the confusion.
Trust the confusion.
Yes. And there is a deeply rooted psychological reason for this. What happens the moment after you blow up at your partner or max out that credit card?
You feel terrible.
You feel immense shame. The first thought is, I'm broken. I'm right back where I started. All that therapy was useless. And that thought triggers a massive shame spiral. Urologically, shame causes a huge spike in cortisol.
Right, the stress hormone.
Exactly. It triggers a fight or flight response that physically shuts down the prefrontal cortex. which is the exact part of your brain responsible for rational, forward-thinking change. So by relabeling the meltdown as the friction of genuine change, we dismantle the shame.
So you're saying it's a physiological defense mechanism.
Yes, you cannot observe your errors and rewrite your internal code if your brain is drowning in cortisol. The text validates the feeling of stalling, so the prefrontal cortex can actually come back online.
Okay, I'll give you that one. Removing the shame spiral is a vital clinical step. If you're paralyzed by self-hatred, you obviously can't grow. But removing shame shouldn't mean removing our ability to objectively measure where we are standing. We still need a metric.
Fair enough?
If the presence of a meltdown is no longer a sign of failure, but rather a sign of internal reorganization, how do you tell the difference between the two? How do you know you weren't just totally stagnating?
That is the exact right question to ask. And the difference isn't about whether or not the meltdown happens. The metric for real growth is recovery time.
Recovery time?
Yes. Let's say your old operating system gets triggered. In the past, that trigger might have sent you into a depressive spiral or a toxic behavior pattern that lasted, I don't know, a week. Now, you still get triggered. You still take those 3 steps back, but you catch yourself in a day.
Ah, I see.
And then, a few months later, you catch yourself in an hour. The meltdown still occurred. The messy red chaos still flared up. But the new teal-green code booted up faster to catch it. That's how you know it's reorganization and not just backsliding. The shadow self still recoils, but its half-life is shrinking.
Okay, that is a highly practical, observable metric. I like that. If the recovery time is shrinking, you are moving forward. But see that internal grace period, where we are nursing these shrinking half-lives of our bad habits, is it exactly what makes the text's advice about the outside world so complicated.
How so?
Because while you are internally timing your recovery, the external world is still happening to you. It doesn't pause for your internal reorganization.
Right, which the source material identifies as the pivot point. It introduces a very specific 3-step process for this. Acknowledge the noise, deliberately shift your focus inward, and connect with your vision.
And this is exactly where the framework loses me. Let's look at the literal advice that the material gives. It says, I hunker down and I focus instead not on the issues that surround me, but on the visions that I have for myself in my head.
Yeah, it's about focus.
But it describes the external world, other people's expectations, the demands on your time, as a coordinated attack. I believe this is a genuinely dangerous way to process reality.
Why dangerous? It's just a method of tuning out distractions.
Because it treats reality as an obstacle to growth, rather than the testing ground for it. Think about a ship captain. If a captain is caught in a literal hurricane and decides to just ignore the storm outside to stare at a beautifully drawn map of a calm ocean down in the cabin, the ship is going down.
Well, that's a bit of a stretch.
Is it? The external world isn't just noise. The issues that's around me, a struggling relationship, a stalling career, a financial crisis, those aren't distractions from your peace. They are the environment in which your peace must operate.
I actually think the ship captain analogy proves the text's point, but you have to look at the captain's cognitive load. When you are rewriting your baseline neurological code, your cognitive load is absolutely maxed out.
Okay, but
No, let me finish. You have no spare processing power. So when those external demands hit, they actually do feel like a coordinated attack because your nervous system is already totally overwhelmed. If our captain is actively having a panic attack at the wheel, staring at that map in the cabin to regulate their breathing is the only way they are eventually going to be able to steer the ship.
a map in the head doesn't navigate the waves. Hunkering down sounds defensive because it is defensive.
The material actually anticipates that exact criticism. It explicitly says, I know when we hear hunkering down, it sounds kind of defensive, right? Maybe even a little weak, like you're retreating. But it reframes this as a power move. It's dropping an anchor.
Dropping an anchor in a hurricane.
Yes. You drop an anchor at the peak of the storm so you don't crash against the rocks. You don't leave the anchor down forever. The strategic shift inward is about finding a calm center. If you try to fight the external chaos head-on while your internal OS is dismantled, you'll just be reacting, spinning your wheels, and reverting to your oldest, worst habits.
Look, if we're strictly talking about a temporary anchor like a 5-minute regulatory practice to get the heart rate down, then I concede its utility. But the rhetoric of the material is much more sweeping than a 5-minute breathing exercise.
I wouldn't call it sweeping.
It says everything around me feels like an attack. When an individual starts believing that friction with the outside world is a coordinated attack on their personal growth, they become immune to valid feedback.
How does that make them immune to feedback?
Think about the partner we mentioned earlier. If your partner comes to you and says, "Hey, your behavior is really hurting me lately," is that a valid external issue that requires your immediate attention? Or is that just noise and static that you should ignore while you hunker down and look at the pristine vision in your head?
That's mischaracterizing the text.
This framework makes it incredibly easy to categorize basic human accountability as an attack on your peace. You end up building this highly evolved teal-green operating system that only works when the computer is completely disconnected from the internet.
But that assumes a level of ego and narcissism that the text actively works against. The vision the material tells you to connect with isn't some delusion of grandeur where you're perfect and everyone else is wrong.
Then what is it?
The vision is the grounded, compassionate, healthy version of yourself that you are desperately trying to become.
But how does staring at that vision solve the actual conflict with the partner?
It dictates how you respond to the conflict. Acknowledging the noise doesn't mean ignoring your partner's pain. It means recognizing that the chaotic energy of the conflict is threatening to pull you into your old shadow self.
Okay, I see where you're going.
If you don't drop the anchor and connect with that internal vision first, you're going to screen back. You're going to get defensive. By hunkering down, even for just a moment, you choose to respond from your vision rather than your old triggers. And I think that realization is exactly why the material completely dismantles the traditional idea of what a goal even is.
Right. This is where it tackles the myth of the mountain climb.
Exactly. The material states unequivocally, becoming is not some grand destination you finally arrive at. It's not a trophy you win or a finish line you cross. It calls that whole idea a total myth.
Yeah.
Because you can't respond from a place of calm if you are constantly obsessing over a timeline of where you think you should be by now. Instead, it redefines becoming as the small, quiet, daily decisions to just begin again.
And I will happily give you that one. Abandoning the myth of the clean, linear mountain climb is psychologically sound. The idea that growth is this permanent state of enlightenment you just unlock one day, that just sets people up for failure.
Right, it's a trap.
Breaking it down into a daily choice is grounded, it's realistic. But there is a massive limitation in how the text applies this concept.
Which is?
The text insists that this profound choice to begin again is found when we forget the huge picture and focus entirely on the vision in our head. If this daily decision only ever happens internally, it remains strictly theoretical.
I don't see how it's theoretical. The decision itself is the literal rewiring of the brain. When the text says, "Today, I choose myself," it's not some hollow bumper sticker mantra. It is the active, conscious rejection of the neural pathway that wants to succumb to the chaos.
Yes, but a choice has to eventually manifest as a physical action. The storm is the terrain, right?
Sure.
If every single day I wake up, realize I've taken 3 steps back, hunker down, ignore my external issues, and quietly whisper to myself, "Today, I choose my vision," and then I go out and do the exact same destructive things again tomorrow, what have I actually accomplished?
You're assuming zero behavioral change, though.
I'm saying you are experiencing the sensation of profound internal growth while remaining externally paralyzed. The decision to begin again is a beautiful starting point, but the text frames that internal choice as the entirety of the work. It has to translate into overcoming the external issues, not just finding more enlightened ways to retreat from them.
Look, I think you're demanding that the internal work yield immediate external dividends, and that contradicts the very nature of the progress paradox. The whole point is that the internal code has to be entirely rewritten before the external outputs change sustainably.
I'm not demanding immediate.
It takes immense time. It takes thousands of repetitions. You can't expect your outward behavior to be flawlessly consistent until that internal choice to begin again becomes your dominant reflex.
I'm not demanding immediate dividends or flawless consistency. I am demanding a system of measurement that isn't entirely self-referential. If the only metric for success is how deeply you feel connected to the vision inside your own head, you have completely decoupled your personal growth from objective reality. True becoming has to be an integration. It's taking that internal vision and testing it against the friction of the real world.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I want to summarize where I stand. I really believe the progress paradox brilliantly captures the agonizing, invisible reality of deep internal change. Dismantling old habits, taking 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, this isn't a failure of accountability. It is the chaotic, exhausting friction of a new operating system coming online. And when the noise of the world threatens to drown out that fragile new code, dropping an anchor into your internal vision isn't avoidance. It is the ultimate strategic defense required to survive the storm.
And I maintain that while the path of human growth is undeniably messy and nonlinear, we have to be incredibly careful not to weaponize the concept of a paradox. We cannot use it to excuse our own regression, and we certainly shouldn't define the external world, with its complex relationships, its demands, its very real issues, purely as an enemy to our peace. If we hunger down solely in the visions in our heads, we risk navigating a beautiful map of a world we no longer actually inhabit.
Despite the divergence on how to handle the external world, it's clear we share a strong point of convergence today. We both firmly agree with the material's rejection of growth as a steady climb to some finish line.
Absolutely. The myth of the finish line does so much more harm than good. The true power really is in the present tense, the daily choice to just begin again.
For everyone listening, there is so much more to explore regarding how you actually build and maintain this internal anchor. I highly suggest engaging with the broader Becoming series to see how these concepts play out in real time.
Yeah, the full context definitely helps clarify the mechanics of the framework.
So we leave you with this to consider today. Think back to that city, tearing up its own streets to lay a new power grid. When you look at your own life, are the current struggles you're facing the necessary, messy friction of a brilliant new operating system finally coming online? Or is it a sign that the time for studying the blueprints in the cabin is over and you need to step out of your head and face the storm?